Welcome to another lesson series. Again, just to remind you that these lessons are tailored more towards the grade 7s in Ontario, but anybody who's needing some refreshers or lessons, hopefully this will help you out. Now, this series of lessons is going to focus on algebra. Throughout the lessons, we're going to learn about variables, expressions, and equations. And we will also touch a little bit on patterning as well, but that will be more towards the end of our unit. Now, before we get into anything, I wanted to refresh your memory of something. Hopefully you recall using it in previous lessons within grade 7 or even grade 6, and that is the order of operations. So when you do have an equation, each part of the equation is going to be solved according to a specific rule, and that rule is BEDMAS. Now, the B, if you recall, stands for brackets, so anything within the brackets is answered first. And then you move on to exponents, division, multiplication, and adding and subtracting. Now, the one thing I want you to remember that I always find students always tend to forget, when you have division and multiplication and adding and subtracting, you have to do that part of the equation in the order in which they appear. So, in other words, you don't always answer division before multiplication. If multiplication appears first, then you would do that first. And same thing with adding and subtracting. If for whatever reason you see subtracting before an adding part of the sentence, then you would do that first. Now we are going to practice this, so it will be something that you will be getting used to. Before we get into it, I have a couple of rules that I want you to remember. The first one is I want you to complete each part of the algebra equation vertically, which means you're going to do one operation per line, and that goes on to my second rule. So I don't want to see the equation and on your next line is the answer and that's it. I want to see your work, and I want you to remember to do one operation per line. That is very, very important. So depending on how long your equation is, you could have 2, 3, 4 lines, and that's completely normal, okay? As you move on into grade 8 and so forth, you'll start grouping calculations together, but for the purpose of what we're doing, I want to keep things very, very simple. Okay, we're going to practice. Here I have 6 plus 3 multiplied by 4. So we're going to go through that first. Now, if you recall, we're going to remember that we always use BEDMAS. Okay, I'm going to write it up there. I'm only going to do it for this equation because afterwards that's something that you should be remembering. So if I go through according to BEDMAS, I'm going to do my multiplication before my adding. So in this case, I have my 3 times 4 that I'm going to do first. Now the 6, I'm just going to set it aside for a little bit, but I'm not going to forget about it. But I want you to do this because I noticed that when people do this part of the solving, they always like to drop parts. I'm going to take that 6 and I'm going to write it down. Okay? I'm not going to forget about it, and I'm putting my plus sign because that's what I need to do. I need to add 6 to whatever 3 times 4 is, and we know 3 times 4 is 12. Okay? And then afterwards, on my next line, if you add 6 and 12 together, now I have 18. And that is your final answer. And I'd like you to get to the habit of circling your final answer. It's always a good step to get into, especially when you get into calculations and problems that have many different steps. This helps the teacher zone in on where your final answer is, and all the work will be just above that. Okay, and here is another way I did this one on my computer. So again, you can see from the highlighted section the portion of the problem that I did first, which was 3 times 4. In other words, they're very much the same. Okay, don't forget, I haven't done it here, but this is what your work will look like. You will have the initial question, and then all your work will be underneath it. Okay, now let's go on to another one. We have 5 plus 3 in brackets, so hopefully you're remembering BEDMAS. And then we're going to divide our answer by 2. So if you remember BEDMAS, again, B stands for brackets. Anything in brackets goes first. And that's what I have here. Okay? So if you remember, 5 plus 3 is going to be 8. Now, one of my rules was one operation per line. So all I'm going to do with the divided by 2 is I'm just going to carry it over to this part. And this is my first line. Now my second line is going to be where I'm actually going to answer 8 divided by 2. And now I have 4. Circle my final answer, and there we go. And this is what it will look like in your notebooks when you go to actually do it. You would write down the equation. I know some students, when they're first learning to do BEDMAS, they like to underline the parts of the equation that they want to do first. You can. You don't have to, but it is an option. But as you can see, the 5 plus 3 was something that we did first. 8, and then you copy the 2 down. Don't drop it. Don't ignore it. Okay, let's go on to another one. I have here 18 divided by 3 multiplied by 2. So if you remember BEDMAS, in this case we have division and multiplication, so this one's nice and easy. But remember, we're always going to solve it in the order in which they appear. And in this case, 18 divided by 3 is first, so that's the part I'm going to answer first. So I'm going to put, and I know that is 6. And again, I have the multiplied by 2. I'm not going to ignore it. And I'm going to write it down. So 6 times 2, and then my next line will be 12. All right, and in your notebook, this is what it will be closer to what you're looking like. Your first line will have the equation, and then you'll move on to each step. 1 operation per line. I keep saying that. It is that important. Okay, this one is going to be a few other steps. I've made these next a couple of practice questions a little bit longer. So now we'll be able to use some different parts of BEDMAS. We have 15 divided by 7 minus 4 in brackets multiplied by 6. So we have a lot going on here. Now, if you remember BEDMAS, B-E-D-M-A-S, we're going to do brackets first, and that's what I have here. Now, the 15 divided by, I still need, I'm not going to ignore it. And as I've been doing before, I'm going to be writing that one down first. And I'm going to put that division sign because I'm still going to need that. Now 7 minus 4 is 3, so we're going to write that down. And I have the 6 at the end, so I'm going to write this part down of my equation. And I'm going to put an equal sign because that's my next step. Now I'm going to write down my equal sign again, and I have to investigate and see which part of this am I going to do first? So we know according to BEDMAS, we're going to do division and multiplication first in the order in which they appear. Here, your 15 divided by 3 is first. So we're going to do 5. And I need to do 6, but I'm not going to ignore it. So I'm going to go multiply by 6, and I have an answer of 30. All right? So as we can see here, when I bring up this part of the equation, this one will be a little bit longer in your notebook, but this is the detail that I'm looking for. The first line is the equation, and then you're remembering to bring down the 15, do the brackets first, and then write the 6 down. Again, those are numbers that you don't want to forget because you don't want to be in a scenario where you forget to do a part of the equation because your answer will be all wrong. All right, and then again, as you can see, our final answer is on the last line. Okay, I think this is our last review here. So practice 5, I'm looking for a half of 8 4/10 plus 9 1/10, subtract 3 6/10. So now I'm throwing a little bit of the decimals in there. And again, if you remember BEDMAS, I'm going to write down here BEDMAS for a reason. And if it helps you out to do that, I know sometimes students will put BEDMAS right on the margin of their notebook as a simple reminder, but if that's a step that you have already committed to memory, that's probably a place where you definitely need to be going. Now, if I take a look here, I have adding and subtracting, but the only part that's going to be a little bit odd is 1/2 of 8 4/10. Now, if you remember fractions and what operations go with certain words, this word of is division, right? So I am going to do 1/2 of 8 4/10. So if I think about it, if I have 8 4/10, I want to take half of it. My answer is going to be 4 2/10. All right? And then I'm going to copy the rest of the equation down because I don't want to ignore it. Plus 9 1/10, take away 3 6/10. All right? So now I've copied the rest down. And now I'm ready to go and actually do the next part of my equation here. Okay? Should make my book here a bit neater. So I have an adding and subtracting, which I have here, and I'm going to do these operations in the order in which they appear. So in this case, 4 and 2/10 plus 9 and 1/10 is first, so that is going to be 13 and 3/10. And then I'm going to take my 3 and 6/10 down. I'm not going to ignore it because I know that's an operation, but I have to remember my rules, one operation per line. So that's my next part of my equation. And if I do 13 and 3/10, subtract 3 and 6/10, I'm going to get an answer of 9 and 7/10. Okay? And I have this here, and what I've done, I've highlighted the steps that are done first. That way you can see which one I did first. I did the half of 8 and 4/10 first, which gave me 4 and 2, because remember, that's like same division, 4 and 2/10. Copy the rest down, and then we just solved it step by step. My next part I did was just adding, and the final part that I did was subtraction. Okay? So there's all of the examples that I'm going to be doing with you, and this is just the same slide that I had at the beginning. Please make sure you commit this to memory. That's really, really important, because as you go on in grade 7 and 8 and further, they start putting new things in here, meaning that you could see some fractions in here. And in our case, we could see some integers that will also go into here. I mean, you see that I put decimals in there as well. So things can be a little bit complicated, but remember the basics, okay? Dead mass. And please keep that inside your head, because as we go on to do future lessons, this is going to become the foundation of how we solve all the other equations in the future. Okay? So good luck, and we'll see you next time. Bye.